So this past week, I experienced kind of an irony over the fact that this is our last installment of our Hope is Here series. Now, we're going to talk about hope off and on throughout the rest of the year as kind of a theme, but this is the end of the series. But leading up to it, I had a couple of experiences that really called on hope and challenged it and everything else. I'll tell you about that in just a moment. But before I do that, welcome Henderson and those of you watching online and our West Campus and our East Campus. And you are in what I've started just labeling the Great Paradox Weekend. And what I mean by that is it's Memorial Day weekend. And Memorial Day weekend is it's the start of the summer, and it's fun, and it's a 3-day weekend, and this is the time you go to the lake or go to the river or go wherever it is you go. And it's that intro to the fun of the summer and everything else. But at the same time, they say that back right at the Civil War, I remember reading this, at the Civil War, they say that every single household in the entire country was affected directly by the war, because so many soldiers had been killed that everybody, even if they didn't have someone under their roof, everybody knew a husband or a friend or a son or an uncle or a nephew. Everybody did. The entire country did. And so there were those who had suggested just a few years after the Civil War was over that they have a weekend, that they have a time, they called it Decoration Day, where they honor the war dead. And of course, you know that since then, we've celebrated Memorial Day to honor those who have died in all of our wars since then. Now, most of you know, because I've mentioned it a number of times, my son and my son-in-law have, since they're in the military, they've made our family kind of a military family. And I've got to see it from the inside, and it's raised my respect for people in the military exponentially, for one thing. Because here's what I've learned. Soldiers are the people that will do things that no one else will do in order to protect and help us all to live in what is, in effect, a dangerous and very dark world when it comes to our freedoms. And there's always this living possibility, no matter how remote, you know what's kind of hanging around out there. There's at least the possibility that you could send a loved one away and have them never come back. And when I think about the fact that lots and lots and lots of scores of families have experienced that throughout our nation's history, I just want to encourage all of us that while you're having fun, which is a good thing, and you're out on the lake or doing whatever it is you're doing, pause a little bit and just remember that in the world in which we live, you have that freedom and you have that opportunity even because there were people who did things that no one else will do, and that includes laying down their lives. So let's remember that as we go into Memorial Day. So this past week, I was on the phone, and I had the person on speakerphone and just chatting back and forth, and I'm kind of a news junkie, all right? So I put several push notifications on my phone that give you news kind of as it's happening. And I looked down while I was in this conversation, and I saw the words school shooting. And then I saw the words elementary school shooting. And then I started seeing numbers. I think the first number I saw was 14 died. And as I'm sitting there and I'm watching this happen and it unfold right in front of me, and that was one of the things that I experienced, and it wasn't just me, it was us collectively. I mean, my stomach churned, and that cloud that you experience just came over me, that no matter what I was thinking of or what I was concerned about or whatever else, just kind of evaporated in that moment as I thought about this little children being murdered in cold blood and families going through all this. And I'm sure you're the same. I mean, I take these things very personally. I think it's because I raised kids myself, and you've heard me talk so much about my own grandkids. And I really literally can't think of anything worse for someone to go through than to go through that, what those families are, and the knowledge that they are going through it, that there's parents and grandparents experiencing these things right now, and that the kids themselves, what they experience, it's not a little overwhelming, it's a lot overwhelming. It's soul-crushing. And I'm still carrying around a little bit. Now add to that the fact that we've been through this before, and over a 30-year period. And what I know is that the other thing that really puts my soul in a bad place when it comes to hope is that we get into a debate. And everybody wants to solve the problem. Everybody can see the problem. It's the worst problem you can possibly have. It seems as though it presents itself that way, but we get in our different camps and red versus blue, and we just argue and argue and argue and argue, and the problem doesn't get solved because we're in this stalemate. Heard one psychologist said, and it's pretty easy to understand. He said, hopelessness is a feeling that things will not and cannot change, and creates a sense that there is no solution to a problem. So if you're in a place of hopelessness, it's because you're looking at a problem that doesn't seem to be able to be solved. And so I was experiencing that, and I'm sure everybody was. And I knew at that moment that I was going to have to adjust the sails to the message that I was going to deliver today, because there are certain things that come along in our nation that I think it enters the collective consciousness of everybody, that you need to acknowledge it, you need to talk through it, you need to think of the Bible and everything and the Christian faith through the grid, through the lens of things like this, because we know it's a reality and we can't deny it, especially when we were talking about hope, right? So that was one thing. Now, the other thing is now on this, I've taken our church through kind of my own personal journey in a category of my life. And the reason I do this is because, first of all, I always share it out of my personal life because I think it's important. I think it's important if I'm going to be an example, if I'm going to be someone who lives this stuff, then people need to see it lived, and they need to see kind of whether you're going through challenges or good times. If I'm going to put myself on a platform and preach or teach or whatever else, we need to see how it relates to normal life. And so the short story is that I was diagnosed with prostate cancer back in the first part of this year, and I've shared that with everybody. And then they said it was highly treatable, and so I went into surgery, and I had my surgery, and you guys track with me on that. And then recovered from that, feel great, feel normal again, and all that sort of thing. But and I'm a little embarrassed in some ways to say this, but right after my surgery, I got up in front of the congregation and I said, hey, they tell me I'm cancer-free, and everybody applauded and all that. And I thought I was, but the phone call that I was on when I was reading those push notifications on was with a specialist. It was with a doctor that I had been put with. Because the way these things go is when they observed it with the naked eye, they said, yeah, it looks really, really good, like we got everything and all that. But what they do with the tissue that they remove from you is that they examine it under a microscope, and that way they can really tell them exactly what was going on. And then according to the specialist, without going into much more detail, her words were, well, the kind it was and where it was, I can 100% guarantee you that there's some still in there somewhere in your body. 100% guaranteed. That's a pretty solid, confident thing to say. It wasn't like, it's a 50-50 shot, or it's 80-20 or whatever. It was 100%. There was a word. So I thought, wow, okay, that's certainly not good. But she went on to explain that there's ways to treat this and all that, and hope's not lost or any of that. Now, here's why I bring this up. Because at that moment, first of all, what happened down in Texas far, 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 far outweighs anything I've ever experienced or ever will experience probably. And that I carried that grief around me. And when I heard the news about what the doctor gave me, I wasn't even, hurt or devastated or any of that kind of stuff. I had a remarkable amount of peace. On the other hand, just the two put together, and maybe this is a collective experience that we're all having. Maybe you're just kind of walking under a cloud because of a national thing, or maybe you're walking under a cloud and you're feeling a sense of hopelessness because of a personal thing. And so what I wanted to do today as I adjusted my sails in light of those kinds of things is I found myself wanting just to pass along and gather up what we've talked about when we come to hope. And some of it will be basically review of what we've been talking about and apply it. Because what I found in myself as I was processing these kind of heavy things, what's my future going to hold? What's it going to look like? I don't know what I'm going to go through. I don't know how it's going to end. All those things. And at the same time, this national problem and that really gets inside of me. And what I experienced, though, was I found hope in the midst of all that. And today is far less of a teaching as it is an exhortation. And it's an exhortation to one essential idea with two parts. One essential idea with two parts. Here's what I'm going to be basically saying the entire time, is nourish hope in your heart and mind. Nourish hope in your heart and mind. Nourish hope in your heart and in your mind. Nourish it. Now, we've said before, and I keep repeating because the Bible will teach you this, experience will teach you this, scientists will tell you this. This is a fact. Hope is something that can be nurtured, and it needs to be. You need it in your life. You need it as a part of your psychology, and it can be nourished. And that would be my charge, that would be my exhortation, because what I found in myself was that to the extent that I had, I could kind of bear what I was facing at that time, and you can as well. There's a great statement. I think we brought it up a little bit earlier, but this is actually a statement from another psychologist who gave him his life. His name is Anthony Scioli, and he gave his life to studying hope. Wrote a book called Hope in the Age of Anxiety. And he has this great statement about it that I want us to be reminded of and why we need it so desperately. He said, hope is, in short, an essential element of our spiritual lifeblood. And it is the best medicine for overcoming feelings of helplessness, alienation, and fear. Individuals who are hopeful reap more than a mental strategy for grasping at goals, which they do, solving problems, or managing crisis, which they do. They achieve a different way of being in the world. And when our world is filled with the kind of evil that has school shootings and things like that, or possibilities of being told that, you've got a health problem that may be a lot more difficult to overcome, we need a different way of being in the world. And so I want to encourage us all to intentionally nourish hope in our heart and mind, all right? Now, the way I want to do this, I'm going to give you kind of just a couple hows, just fairly briefly. The way I want to do this is I'm going to go back and one more time read the passage that's been kind of headquarters passage for this entire talk about hope, because it's overflowing with hope coming from the writer Peter. He says in 1 Peter chapter 1, beginning at verse 3, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. This entire thing is a praise, by the way. It's almost like a worship song kind of thing. And our Father, Lord Jesus Christ, in his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. This inheritance is kept in heaven for you, who through faith are shielded by God's power until the coming of salvation that is ready to be revealed at the last time. In all this you greatly rejoice. Now watch this. Though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief and all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though it is refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy, for you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls. And then he elaborates on that, and then he ends this way. Therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. Now again, that's just boiling over with all kinds of hope, and he's giving us an entire perspective. And here's what I do want to review and I want to repeat when it comes to nourishing hope. What we've seen time and time again as we examine this passage from every angle is that he placed his hope and he drew his hope from ultimates as opposed to immediates. That's a theme that's gone back and forth. And I even challenged you a few weeks ago, be in prayer. And I prayed this prayer myself. Lord, help me to draw my hope from ultimates more than immediates. We all have immediates that we hope for. We all know that. We all have goals that we've set and things that we're looking forward to. And it's Memorial Day weekend and we can't wait for the summer and we've got all these things planned. That's wonderful. It's great. It's fine. But too often our lives and our hope consist of only those things. And what you can see, he talks about heaven, he talks about the inheritance, he talks about the second coming, he talks about Jesus Christ being revealed. He said, put your hope there. See, these people, really, Peter and the people that he was coaching, they really, truly did live with an overarching sense of there's another world that's coming that's going to change and redeem and restore this broken, evil world. And the only way you can really survive looking in the face of some of the struggles that we have here and school shootings and all this kind of thing without your soul collapsing is to know and be confident that there's another world coming, that there's a volume 2, that there's a redemption that is going to arrive. And that has to be something that's alive in us. That has to be something that's real to us. And that's why I say you've got to nourish that. Because notice what he does in the middle of all that, and we've not looked at this part. He says in the middle of all this hope stuff, he says, now, for a little while, you've had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. He acknowledges that. Anthony Scioli, the writer of the book, I just said, he pointed out about hope. As he talks about hope, he said, what you have to understand is hope is not blind optimism. He says, you have to distinguish between the virtue of real hope and the vices of false hope, blind optimism, or denial. In the Bible, you're called on to be very realistic about the situation. I've told you before, the writer, Peter, scholars think he died fairly soon after he wrote this letter. And probably several of the people that he was talking to were killed a little after this letter. No wonder he had them looking to this higher thing. I also know, I went back and checked again, because I had heard years ago that he says, you have suffered grief in all kinds of trials. That all kinds, that word in the Greek means multiple colors in the original language. And what it is getting at is varieties of all kinds of trials and struggles and problems and issues. That yes, life can and will be filled with that. And the way you nourish your hope is you have to face the fact that your hope is not based on, and theirs wasn't either, like things are awesome now, and they're gonna be awesomer if I just stick around a little longer. And after that, they're gonna be awesomer still. That's not how it worked. There was never that promise made. So he's telling them, listen, there's gonna be trials, there's gonna be things that interrupt, there's gonna be struggles, there's gonna be pains. But what you wanna do is keep on lifting your eyes, keep on lifting your hope to those ultimate things. Nourish it, and nourish it intentionally. And this is what I experienced personally, because I was so thankful that I had been coached years ago on something I want to exhort you to now. How do you do that? What do you mean nourish hope? What does that look like? I would take it back to good, old-fashioned, time-tested spiritual disciplines in your life. And I can think of a number of them, but the most famous, the most common, but the most necessary are prayer, reading your Bible, and church. That those three things, I was coached on that, I was pushed on that, I was challenged to that early on in my walk, and I could not be more thankful as I face an evil world, and I've gotten a little bit older, and I'm talking to specialists about my health that bring me bad news. I was challenged years ago to have a true, regular prayer life that's based upon what the Bible has to say about prayer. It's not just kind of talking loosely to God, which it can be, but actually is set aside in a time. That's what Jesus did. He went away and he prayed. And he prayed to the Father. Why? Because it develops a true intimacy and a relationship with the Lord so that when those times come, you have hope. You've got plenty of hope in the hope bank, so to speak. Secondly, reading your Bible. Reading your Bible takes you, the reason we do it and the reason we challenge people to do it, doing it daily, getting inside of there as often as you possibly can. It lifts your thoughts to other places. It has you thinking about things that you wouldn't naturally think otherwise. Because I promise you, when it comes to hope, most of us, before we looked at that 1 Peter passage, we never really thought about, heaven and inheritance and second coming. We do occasionally when we're in church. But he's saying that what the Bible does is it kind of lifts your mind and your eyes where you're looking at life from a different perspective. And finally, church attendance. I mean, you could not pay me enough to get me out of this thing. Because what's so critical, and I say church attendance because never think of yourself as just attending church. We don't attend church. We're part of a believing community, but that takes attendance. It takes proximity. That's why you come. Now, it's an irony and a half to be saying on the second least attended weekend of the entire year. I know that. And I'm not condemning people that are out on the lake. I mean, sort of. I mean, the people that are actually here are much more spiritual than those people. But what you're doing is you connected to a believing community where you can love others and they can love you back. Scioli actually gets in his book where he talks about how relationships are absolutely critical to nourishing hope. That's how you have it. I can't imagine going through some of this stuff with health or whatever else and not having people to share it with and be concerned and shoot me text and all those kinds of things. I have that because I'm a part of a believing community. And I pray that the people that are going through the horrific stuff in Texas, that I think that the one thing that's going to get them through outside the raw presence of God is going to be the presence of God in the form of community. And if you've ever grieved, you know that's true. Nourish hope in your heart and in your mind. That's your heart. Nourish it. Doing things intentionally, because there's probably coming a day when you're going to need to draw on that, and it better be there. Number two, nourish it in your mind. In your mind. So last week I stood up and I introed the message by saying this one's going to be a little bit different, okay? It's going to be a little bit different. I kind of prepared people for that and everything. And then I proceeded to do what I can only describe as like this big, full-on, geeked out history lesson, which I love that kind of thing. I do history for entertainment, all right? So I just went through this entire historic deal and concluded. And if you didn't listen to it, I'd challenge you to go back and test it out and see if it does anything for you. Because here's what's wild about it. This is funny to me. When I reached the end of this kind of different way of approaching things, I had at least a couple through, I got more glowing reviews and compliments on that message than I think I've gotten on a message like in the last many years. Okay, I mean, it was funny. There were a couple of people that told me it was the best message they ever heard. I was like, hey, I found the secret. That's what I'm gonna do from now on. I'm just gonna geek out on history the entire time I'm preaching. It'll be awesome, I found it. Well, don't panic. Because I know for some of you, it really scratched where you itch and you thought, man, that really just, and others were probably dying 1,000 deaths listening to all the things I had to say last week. But here's what I know happened to people that did really light up over it. And I've watched this over and over and over again, and this is why we emphasize this. I said, nourish hope in your mind. The experience I think they had is one that I've had many times that I'm hoping people have. We talk around here all the time about you bring your brain to church, bring your brain to church. And the reason is because when you come to Jesus, and everybody that's come to Jesus has experienced some level of this, you have a very internal, personal experience that goes with it. You just do. It's very internal, and it's very personal. And you ride on that, and it's great. But somehow between our world, in 2022, and the world of the Bible, there's like this veneer. And then when you live of doubt and religiosity and kind of curiosity, and sometimes it doesn't feel very real because we're so far removed from it all. But and the whole point of the message was using archaeology and history to affirm the fact that when you read the Bible, these guys were really telling us the truth. They were testifying in a way that's really real and can be confirmed by archaeology. And I think what happens to people at that point is it just kind of, a light bulb goes off and they have this whole new dimension added to their belief. And so my charge to you is if you want to nourish hope, do the classic spiritual disciplines to nourish hope in your heart. But take advantage, especially in the modern age, we're in the golden age of great material that's out there in the form of podcasts and in YouTube, and there's little video vignettes you can watch. There's all kinds of stuff out there that can nourish your mind around hope, because you and I need to know, and we need to be confident that these things are real. I know I've told this story before many times. It was one of my favorites. It was a friend of mine that was actually diagnosed with cancer. He had a doctor look at him and say, I'm giving you about 6 months, man. And he got a hold of me, and we sat in the car, and he said, listen, I got to know if this stuff is really real. It's real, right? Because they may be lowering me down on the ground here before too long. Is Jesus really there? Did he really rise again from the dead? Is there really a heaven? Am I going to be okay? He listed it off and off and off. And I was able to confidently say, because of stuff in the mind, that's what you need for hope. Now, the good news is, that was about 15 years ago from him. He's still living. But I'll never forget that. You've got to tell me this stuff is real, right? That's what I mean by nourish hope. Nourish it in your heart. Nourish it in your mind. Because as we look at an evil world and we face personal things that are rattling and can be dark, you want to know and do it while things are not that way. Do it in your own life as you're able. And here's how I want to close. As we process this whole shooting thing and maybe your own individual issues, we put together a film that we've shown a few times before, and some of you have seen it before, but you probably don't remember it that well. It's a film that's my personal favorite that we've ever done because it's called Is There Hope? And I want to close out this Memorial Day Sunday as we live inside the paradox. And I want to invite you to listen very, very, very carefully to the words because it mixes those two things, heart and mind, and answers the ultimate question that we all need to be nourished by. Watch this.
Life can be bright, beautiful, fun, and amazing. But there's a cloud that hangs over everything. Death. Each day, for any of us, death is always possible. Even worse for all of us, death is inevitable. Scientists tell us that the universe itself has a shelf life. The expiration date is millions and millions of years away, but still, just like our lives, it's just a matter of time. All our bright, beautiful, fun experiences, memories, hopes, dreams, interests, relationships, loves, and hates will simply end. Yeah, that's pretty depressing. Are there any answers? Is there hope? As with all the other big questions of life, different worldviews give radically different answers. A naturalistic, secular, all of reality is physical worldview would say bluntly, no, there is no hope, but thanks for playing. Eastern pantheistic views are more hopeful and more complex. All of reality is spiritual and therefore indestructible. But that spiritual essence is one impersonal thing. This means no individual human being survives death. The one universal soul survives, so there is immortality of the soul, but not personal and individual immortality, where you remain you. The matter of hope for the universe and hope for ourselves as individuals is where the Christ-centered worldview truly shines. It claims that through one single event, death, the enemy of life, no longer has the final word. That one single act was the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth from the dead. And before anyone dismisses the idea as a nice-sounding but unrealistic religious sentiment, it's good to take some things into consideration. New Testament scholars and historians are confident they have discovered the earliest known statement of Christian belief on record. In the Apostle Paul's letter to the Church of Corinth, Paul references what scholars would have concluded as a creedal statement that would have been formed and recited within no more than 2 or 3 years of Jesus' life. Paul writes, "For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the 3rd day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time." This statement is significant for the question of hope in a few crucial ways. 1, it demonstrates that the resurrection was central to the Christian message from the very start. In other words, it wasn't a myth that developed over time. 2, it shows that early Christians, who were nearly all Jewish, believed Jesus' resurrection was a fulfillment of the Scriptures they loved and had built their lives on for centuries. Their willingness to adjust their lives, beliefs, and practices to the new reality Jesus inaugurated is a remarkable fact all by itself. 3, it gives to all of us something that is very important for the question of hope. Evidence. Historical, real-life evidence. The same kind of evidence that teaches us Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon or George Washington crossed the Delaware. In this creed, they affirm the resurrection had eyewitnesses. They didn't proclaim that Jesus was a spiritual leader whose body was dead but whose spirit was alive. A claim like that was common, and it's common now. They claimed something more radical and more significant. Jesus truly died. His body was buried in a tomb and rose again 3 days later. Literally, physically, historically. And he is still alive, never to die again. This was the flame that lit the fuse of the greatest movement the world has ever seen. It changed everything. Most of all, it meant that death, the undefeatable enemy of us all, had been defeated. Is there anything in life more worth conquering than death? Think of all the heartache and tragedy, grief and hopelessness so many have suffered at death's hands. Death is rightly called the enemy. It's an invader, a distortion, an alien injected into God's good system that turns beauty to ashes and dancing to mourning. To understand the singular importance of the resurrection, it's vital to know that it was a kind of inauguration. It was a beginning point, a taste of what's coming. We can think of it as a kind of down payment guaranteeing a greater future. It's remarkable and miraculous that Jesus rose again from the dead. But according to the Christ-centered worldview, it doesn't stop there. Jesus is called the pattern of what is coming, a reversal, a restoration, an undoing of all the damage death has done. Like in the case of the predicted death of the universe, it still may be a long time into the future, but it's just a matter of time. The first and most important move has already happened. Everything is set in motion. We are waiting. It's just a matter of time until those who have placed their trust in the resurrected Christ will be healed, restored, and completely delivered from the effects and threats of death. Even though their bodies may be lifeless and placed in tombs just like his, they will be raised again, indestructible, immortal, literally, physically, historically. In the words of the writer and pastor Timothy Keller, the Christ-centered view of things is resurrection. Not a future that is just a consolation for the life we never had, but a restoration of the life you always wanted. This means that every horrible thing that ever happened will not only be undone and repaired, but will in some way make the eventual glory and joy even greater. Honestly, it sounds like a promise that is too good to be true, but that's what makes the physical, eyewitness resurrection story so important. It's not just trying to communicate a nice, inspirational idea. With solid, evidence-based terms, it is assuring us that death does not have the final word. It assures us that there absolutely is hope.